Hey, welcome to the Because I Can live podcast. This is Alison. I'm so glad you're here because today I'm bringing in Annie Gray. She's one of my dear friends. And the reason why I wanted to bring her on is because she, I think, is absolutely brilliant when it comes to talking about habits and habits that actually form into addictions and the ones that actually help us to numb or get around discomfort and the things that we do. So today's episode, we're going to dive in and we're going to talk about it. It's such a fascinating conversation on how the brain works. And her first book that she published called The Naked Mind, the truest version of ourselves, talks about alcoholism. But she just published another book and she's diving into some of the addictions, the other addictions that we all get addicted to, whether it's sugar or tobacco, all the many different things about why our brains work the way that they do. So get ready. Annie is going to open up our minds on addictions and things that we can do to help improve our life. All right, let's dig in. Why don't we start and why don't you kick it off and let us know a little bit about who you are?
Awesome. So hi. So happy to be here. So my name is Annie Grace. I founded a company called This Naked Mind, which is basically at its premise, getting back to the truest version of yourself, sort of without all the habits that we use to numb ourselves and distract ourselves and all sorts of stuff like that. It really started with my own journey, which my main coping mechanism was drinking. So that's where it started. But I'm really excited to be taking it to different things. I'm working on, tobacco and nicotine right now, and then eventually technology and sugar and all the things.
I'll sign up for the sugar one for sure because I'm an absolute addict to sugar. Okay, so the reason why I want to bring you on the podcast is number one, your book's amazing. You have a second book coming out. And it's about alcohol. The first one's about alcohol, and I actually don't drink alcohol. I never have. But the way you describe the brain and habits and creation and decisions, it was just so fascinating to me. And so I'm wondering, will you talk to us about how the brain works, especially around addictions? And I know this one's about alcohol, but I love that you're bringing up these other topics because I think we can all become addicted to Diet Coke, right? Sugar, alcohol, tobacco, like so many different technology. Oh my goodness. And so I love that you are expanding this and taking it to what we all just need a little awakening on. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
So the way I like to think about this is, we all reach for something, and that something could be Instagram, that something could be, food, whatever it is, alcohol, anything. We all reach for something when we experience discomfort. And if we trace it all the way back to kind of how our brain functions, and we're thinking like way back when we were sort of fighting for our brains at their core are survival machines, right? Yeah. And so they do three things really well to ensure our survival. And they, I'd actually add a fourth to kind of what was historically the three things. But the three things they do really well to ensure our survival is avoid pain, seek pleasure, conserve energy. And then the fourth that I've added, which I think is true, is prove themselves right. And so more of the same. Change is different. If you've seen the Crudes when they go outside the cave, he's like, new, bad. We have to say the same. We have to say the same in order to be safe. And it really is part of that, like to maintain survival and to protect ourselves. But for anything that you want to do, and especially if you're like venturing to become an entrepreneur, you're trying to make a change in your life, you're trying to make a change in the world, whatever it is, we actually have to learn how to do the exact opposite of those things. So instead of avoiding pain, we need to learn to lean into discomfort and everything that it teaches us, right? Instead of seeking pleasure, we need to learn to delay gratification. I mean, by its nature, starting a business is delaying gratification. We have a vision for what could be, but day one is not so glamorous.
No, it's not.
We have to take all the steps, right? And then, conserve energy. The brain wants to conserve energy. We have to create massive action. We have to create huge amounts of energy. We have to push ourselves to create more energy, right? And then prove itself right. If the brain by default wants to prove itself right, we really need to be able to be curious and actually allow ourselves to continuously be proven wrong, because that's the only way we grow. And so when we're looking at it from like that really high level perspective, you can see then how all of the things that are marketed to us to get us out of pain, they're really focused towards our survival brain. Hey, this will bring you pleasure. Hey, this will turn off the pain. This will numb you. This will distract you. And really, if we want to evolve into the best versions of ourselves, we have to recognize that the brain has a bent towards survival. It has a bent to avoiding pain, seeking pleasure, all of that stuff. And we need to allow to push ourselves out of and past that. And the best way to do that, I think, is to see it, because we're not like mice. Once we see how a trap works, we won't get caught in that mouse trap. And I think that, that knowledge and framework is really empowering.
Okay. So that was amazing. Go back and will you address this to a little bit more of your beginning of the story? I feel like your story is so deep and is so good. And if you'll tell us a little bit deeper about that story, and then how you were able to work with your brain to stop the addiction, it's just such a powerful story.
Awesome. So my story really started, it started when I was a kid, I guess. I grew up in a tiny 1-room log cabin in the middle of absolutely nowhere. We had a snowmobile to get there in the winter. There was no running water, no electricity. And the reason was because my parents were like super hippies like to the mostest hippies, the most extra hippies. And so they didn't drink, and they were really into this like pure holistic lifestyle. So I didn't have any cautionary tale around alcohol in my upbringing. And when I got married, went on a honeymoon, and then the day we got back from our honeymoon, we drove to New York City from Colorado to sort of start our careers. And I remember my first day on the job, I got asked to come out for drinks. And I didn't know, I wasn't a big drinker. Like I don't know. I just wasn't even really part of my life at the time. I'd had a few drinks, but it wasn't any big deal. And so I was like, okay. So I went out. I didn't know what to order in New York City, but I'd watched Sex and the City. So I was like, okay, I'll order Cosmopolitan, which was not actually what people were drinking. So people definitely thought I was weird. But I ordered a Cosmopolitan, and I got the bill for it, and it was $25. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm not doing that anymore.
I'll take a water with a lemon, please.
Ice cream. Oh, that's so painful. So fast forward, like, I don't know, a year or so, and I actually got taken out. I got taken aside by my boss, and he's like, Annie, why don't you show up at the happy hours? And I was like, I don't really drink. And he's like, okay, let me explain something to you about how the world works. It's not about drinking. It's about like, this is where the deals are done. This is where your ideas are showcased. Like, you need to show up. So I was like, all right, I'm going to show up. So I actually created a method of like, I was going to have a glass of wine and then a glass of water to like make sure I never got too tipsy. And honestly, just to keep up. And I knew I didn't want to be that person who was drunk or falling over or anything like that. Like, I knew that. This was intentional to further my career. It was like this intentional decision to drink. But if I feel myself get too tipsy, I would go to the bathroom to throw up the wine to be able to stay and keep drinking wine. And so it was like so organized and methodical. But the problem is that, alcohol is an addictive substance. It influences your brain in a way that it says, hey, that thing that you are doing, do more of that. That's very important to us. And so there's all sorts of science behind why that is. But long story short is what used to be, just occasionally at work became me starting to come home and be like, oh, I could pour a glass of wine to de-stress, or I could put on my running shoes like I normally do. Well, the wine sounds easier. And so little by little, it started to replace all of the other things that I was using in my life to just cope with being human. And a decade later, I had 2 little boys. I was traveling all around the world. I had done what I set out to do. I was global head of marketing and a very high level corporate executive. And I was drinking close to 2 bottles of wine every single night. And I'd been trying to stop, trying to cut back. And it felt literally impossible. And I was really stuck in this cycle of like blame and shame and all of the stuff that comes with doing something that you don't want to be doing. And, or at least, and really what it is cognitive dissonance. It's 2 voices in your one mind, one saying, yes, you need that thing, you deserve it. And the other saying, no, that's so bad for you. Don't do that. And then ending up doing it and having just this continuous cycle. And then of course you've learned, your brain has learned biologically, chemically, you've learned, like with your mind and your thoughts, that what do you do for pain? You drink. And so that psychological cognitive dissonance of wanting two competing things is extremely painful. And so you end up drinking more. And I was just completely stuck in this cycle until one day I was coming home from London. I was on a train. I was crying. I was so upset with myself. I'd been super boozy the whole night. I'd had a drink at 6 a.m. at the restaurant. And I just realized that what I was trying to do, which was basically trying to stop, I was trying to put myself on an alcohol diet, wasn't working. And I said, you know what? I'm going to stop trying to stop drinking, which was really radical and revolutionary, but I didn't know it. And I was like, I'm going to let myself off the hook. I'm going to just have some compassion and try to rebuild my relationship with myself. But at the same time, I'm only going to do that in the context of having to find out why are things changed? Why did I used to be a take it or leave it drinker? Why did I used to be like alcohol wasn't even important in my life? And now I'm smart, together, and control in every other area of my life, but this is the strange exception, right? And that launched me on basically a year-long journey of I made a list of every single reason I drank, and I just started going through them. And we live in a point in time where you can just, go to Google Scholar and Google studies, pay $50, download the study, read it. And so I was like, okay, alcohol relaxes you. And then I started going through all the reasons that it's actually not true. It's the opposite of true. And little by little, like chipping away, and, my knowledge was growing. Therefore, my emotions started changing. It was like, instead of wanting a drink, at the end of the day, human beings, we do what we feel like doing over the long term. Yeah. In the short term, we can use willpower to do something we don't feel like doing. But in the long term, we're motivated by desire. We do what we feel like doing. That's what makes things, effortless, easy. And I really, truly changed my desire for alcohol. And so that combination of kind of emotion and knowledge, by the time I walked out of my office one day and I told my husband, I was like, if you want to get drunk with me again, tonight's the night, because after tonight, I don't think I'm going to drink anymore. Shared a bottle of wine, and that was really it. And that was over 6 years ago. And then I had all of these journals. And so I was like, okay, the world needs this. I had no intention of quitting my corporate job, but I just figured out how to put a PDF out on a website. Didn't even have an opt-in, didn't even take emails because I didn't know that was a thing. I actually had somebody email me and say, you should take emails for this. This is such great work. And I was like, why would I take an email? He's like, what if you want to tell them something? I was like, what would I want to tell them? I mean, it's such a funny thing. But 20,000 people downloaded it in the first 2 weeks. And I started getting letters from all over the world saying, oh my gosh, this helped me too. And so I got an email from one guy and he was like, you need to make this a book. I was like, how do I do that? And he's like, you can self-publish. I was like, okay. So I tried to figure out how to self-publish, and I self-published The Snake in Mind in 2015. And then a few years after that, it got so much traction that it ended up being like picked up by traditional publishers and all sorts of stuff. So now I've been I was just on Nightline, Good Morning America, all this stuff. And I think at the core of it is because it just works. So
I was just on Nightline. I was just on the news, like big, huge news stations. But this just didn't happen yesterday. You've been doing this for years and years. And people have asked you, did you say like the Army came before COVID hit and said, we need you to help teach your strategy? Because you took, like you were talking about, avoid pain, pleasure, conserve energy, prove themselves wrong. The brain was switching as you started drinking.
We really drink. I mean, so if you think about that, where we started, alcohol is going to numb you. It's going to make you not feel your feelings, not feel your emotions. You drink enough of it, you're going to be unconscious. They used to actually use it in surgery because it's like a numbing agent, right? But it also numbs you to all of the good stuff and all of the important stuff. And so you actually, in order to change this habit, you need to learn how to live in discomfort. And by the way, when you learn to live in discomfort, you can solve that discomfort, because discomfort is the map. Like it is the map to what are the things inside of you that need to be fixed and solved and healed. And similarly, like alcohol is, pleasurable. And unfortunately, it's only pleasurable for about 20 minutes. But our brains are tricked into thinking, oh, that thing, well, we'll just have another drink. And so you want that next drink 20 minutes later, and you're going to try to keep it going. But really, what's much more pleasurable is to live awake and live free. And that's really delaying gratification. And so all of these things sort of come together. And again, to proving yourself right, you just have to start questioning all of your beliefs about what you thought. I mean, I had beliefs like, alcohol is relaxing and I need a drink after a hard day, I believe that, like, I believe the sky was blue. It wasn't something I questioned. It was just something I acted upon out of autopilot, because, okay, it's 5 o'clock, pour a drink. That's just how it works around here. And I really had to get curious about, well, why am I doing this? Well, does it really help? And that was kind of the journey through
all your brain thoughts. And then before we hopped on, we were talking about, and I noticed you mentioned it a couple of times, you were talking about knowledge, emotion, and action. Do you want to dive into that? You were giving me massive aha moments. I wish we would have recorded what you were talking about, because I think it's so powerful, and knowing which one we need to work on, whether it's the knowledge, the emotion, or the action. Will you dive into those?
Yeah. So I'll back up a little before I dive into it and give you like the overarching vision of really how human beings learn, in my opinion, and change. And so we all start what I would call a sleep. And a sleep is where you don't know what you don't know. You don't realize there's something to be changed. In my journey, and I'll just relate it to my journey, although this obviously applies to everything. When I was asleep, I knew my life was stressful, but I was really sure that alcohol was the duct tape that was keeping everything together. Like that was where I was. And so when you're asleep, the thing you need most is you need to become aware. You need to know that there's a problem. And so you move from asleep to aware. So in asleep, you are unconscious. There's a problem. You're totally incapable of solving it. You move to aware, where you're still incapable of solving the problem. You can't do anything about it, but all of a sudden, it's a problem. And for me, this was like oh my gosh, like lead brick in my stomach. What is happening? Alcohol, the thing I thought was my friend, is actually the problem. And awareness is so painful. It is so painful. And usually people don't go further than awareness because it's so painful. And we're like, And so you almost have to train yourself to celebrate awareness. Say, awareness is where the juice is. This is where it gets good. This is where I can fix it, because you cannot fix a problem you don't know you have. And so if you're incapable yet conscious in awareness, the next step is really moving to what I call awake. And awake is where you become capable to change it. And you also are conscious there's a problem still. And a lot of things, they really consider awake to be the goal, the end all be all goal. Like, I want to change the behavior. So there I am. So like, if you were to look at food, so now you're eating healthier. You might not always be happy about it. You might not, it might not be effortless, but you're really doing it. Or you're exercising, and you might not always want to, but you're really doing it. So you're capable, the behavior's changed, and you're awake to it. It's happening. And this is great. And this is considered a win in almost every, function. But I believe that there's another level, and I call it alive. And it is where you are capable, but it is again unconscious. And that means that the change you've made has become effortless. Where like now in my life, and it took a long time to get here and many different iterations, but it is harder for me not to exercise every day than it is to exercise. And that is because of all of these things. And so the question is, if the goal is to become at a place, and you can see this, just to give you another example, you can see this in like a child learning to walk, right? At first, they don't even know that walking's a thing. Then they see their older brothers walking. They're like, oh my gosh, they can walk and I can't walk. And then they try to figure it out and they become capable. And then eventually they become so capable that they no longer think about walking. When's the last time you thought about walking? And then once that happens, you can add mastery to mastery. You can start to learn to run and to jump and to, become an athlete or whatever path is there for you. That's how humans learn. We go through that cycle and then we build upon it with up-leveled skills. One of the things that begs the question is, okay, well, what is it that gets us there? And what gets us there is three key things. It's knowledge, emotion, and action. And those are the things that actually change the chemistry of the brain. So in this pattern, in the cycle, when you become alive, what that means by definition inside your brain is that new neural pathways have been created. And so that new behavior is effortless. You no longer have to consciously think about it. The structure of your brain literally changed. There was an amazing study done of piano players where they looked at the brain, and piano players have more gray matter in the area that relates to playing piano than anything else. Alison Prince, you have more gray matter in the area that relates to e-commerce than the average human being. I promise this is true, right? And so your brain actually, and I have kind of a analogy for that. So when you're first trying something new, it's kind of like driving a Ferrari on a dirt road. It doesn't feel comfortable. It feels uncomfortable. You're having to like do it and repeat it. But eventually when your brain catches up, which it will, if you have those three things in place, the knowledge, emotion, and action, it's like driving the Ferrari on the Autobahn. It's effortless. You don't even have to think about it. And so that's really the goal. And the goal happens with those three things. You have to, and it can happen in different orders. Usually it's you get new knowledge. That knowledge helps to change your emotion, and then you take the action. And I think that's one of the more effortless ways. But as we were talking about, sometimes you have all the knowledge in the world, but your emotion is stuck. And the thing you need to change your emotion is the action. But without all three of those things, you'll never get from awake to alive, which is really where the juice is, because then you can start to focus on the next thing. And you're not, I don't waste any brain space anymore about drinking. I'm not wondering, should I drink? Should I not drink? Yeah. Or by the way, about like exercise, because it's just a foregone conclusion. It's going to happen. And it doesn't take any conscious effort. And we only have so much conscious effort. We're like computers, right? You've got like your processing effort, and then you've got everything below the surface. The more we can get below the surface that's positive and good, the better we are. But the problem is that a lot of what's below the surface is not serving us. And so we have to bring it into our consciousness to change it, and then put the better thing below the surface. So that was a lot. Wow.
No, that was so good, Annie. I could listen to you for the next 15 years. You're so good. Okay, a couple other things. How long have you been sober? I think that needs to be celebrated. 6 years. Woohoo! I love it. Okay, then you were teaching about your happiness level and about how substances can actually numb your happiness. Will you talk about that? I thought that was so fascinating.
So how it works is basically when your pleasure center is overstimulated through, usually the primary chemical is dopamine, but there can be other chemicals involved. The brain needs to maintain homeostasis. It needs to maintain balance, right? Like you can't fall in love and like be in love every single day at that level of like the Twitter-pated 19-year-old, like you're falling in love sort of emotion. You just couldn't function. And your brain couldn't function. And it wasn't ever meant to. And so what the brain does is it turns down that level of pleasure. So we create all these substances that overstimulate the pleasure circuit of the brain. And we think, oh, that's great. Oh, good. Well, give me more Instagram. Instagram does it. Facebook does it. Food does it. High fructose corn syrup in specific. Gambling does it, all of these sorts of things, right? That we human beings struggle with. And so we think, oh, that's great. Like, perfect. That's why I do it, right? Tell me something I don't know. The problem with that is that when the brain senses that you have overstimulated, and by the way, artificially stimulated, all addictive substances have in common an artificial release of dopamine. And artificial means above the natural normal level. So it increases this artificial release. So when your brain says, oh, that's too much, it actually introduces a counter chemical in order to turn that stimulation down and bring you back to homeostasis. Now, the problem is that counter chemical does not purge from the body as fast as the substance does. So, for example, if you are using, like, let's just use drinking as the most logical example. If you're drinking every single day, that drinking is bringing you a little ways up. That counter chemical is bringing you down further than you were before you had your first drink. And then alcohol seems to be the only thing that can break through that pleasure threshold. So you form this false belief that alcohol is making me happy. It's not actually true. It's that you have now this chemical in your system that doesn't just go anywhere because it's not toxic. Alcohol is toxic. This chemical you create in your brain, dynorphin, it's not toxic to the body. You created it yourself, but it's turning down your ability to feel pleasure. So what happens and what people report, and you can see this in video games, you can see this if you spend too much time on social media, people report that nothing else is fun, nothing else is exciting, nothing else is interesting. I have to be doing this, otherwise I'm super bored. And, especially with video games, when my kids play too many video games, nothing is fun. Even the things that they thought were the most fun before, skiing, jumping on the trampoline, nothing is fun. And that's because the only thing that can break through that level of dynorphin that's in your body is an artificial stimulant of dopamine, but it will be for less and less time. And eventually it's a law of diminishing returns. Eventually, even that isn't fun. It just becomes kind of bleh. And that's usually when people look to change because they're like, this isn't working anymore. Well, that's why it's not working.
It's so interesting that you talk about like your kids and video games and stuff like that. I know on Saturday mornings, we used to let our kids watch a video or Saturday morning cartoons or play a game. And they were like, hey, let's go to the beach. And they're like, that doesn't sound fun. And I'm like, Are you serious? Let's go. And so we've actually turned off Saturday morning cartoons because now in the morning we're like, let's go to the beach. Like, okay, let's go. And so you saying that, I'm just keep talking, Annie. Keep talking. Okay, so let's say someone does have an addiction to anything. And I think as human beings, we all have addictions to things. That's just part of life, right? So what do we do to become aware of it? And then give us a few steps on how to stop that addiction.
Awesome. So I think that there's two key pillars here, and it's curiosity and self-compassion. And so, but again, we don't work with the brain. Usually we just try to force the behavior and we try to say, okay, I know this is bad for me, so I'm just not going to do it. But what you've done in that instance is you've almost created this forbidden fruit syndrome where you haven't gotten any of the knowledge. You certainly haven't gotten any of the emotion. You're trying the action. And then you're creating this like self-fulfilling cycle of, oh yeah, well, I knew it was going to be boring. I knew it was going to suck. I knew it because you're depriving yourself. And so what you're feeling in that instance, like if you've ever been on a diet that you really didn't want to go on, and then all of a sudden, all that you're feeling is resentment, pity party, because you didn't actually change anything besides the action. And we think action is the only way to change stuff. Action is kind of the last way. Like we want to change the emotion and the knowledge first. And so how to do that is through curiosity. Why am I doing this? How did I feel before I did it? How did I feel after I did it? I encourage people to start keeping like a journal. Like when I was, I've gotten myself pretty much off Instagram, but when I was on Instagram a lot, I would literally just like be like, okay, I'm going to check it for 15 minutes. Then I'd notice it was 45 minutes that went by and I'd start to journal, like, how do I feel now? And I'd start to really become aware and notice all of my feelings with all of this curiosity. But you cannot be curious without a humongous dose of self-compassion, because usually when humans get curious, we just start to judge ourselves and we get in there and we're like, oh, shouldn't have done that. I can't believe it was 45 minutes. I meant to only spend 15 minutes on Instagram. I can't believe I've ignored my kids for the last 3 hours. Like, what's my problem? And so we get all this judgment. Judgment creates negative emotion. Then we want to escape the negative emotion with the very thing that we were doing in the first place, which is all of those things numb us. They take our consciousness out of reality and into whatever that thing is, whether it's scrolling through a feed or playing the video game or being, not really with it because you're drunk and you've impaired your brain cells or whatever the case is. And so we want to escape. And so you can see how it's like this really intense cycle. Totally. And that cycle can be interrupted with that combination of curiosity and self-compassion. Okay.
So we recognize that we have the self-compassion. What are the next steps?
The next steps are really I would make a list of every single reason that you're doing that behavior and go through that list and find out internally and externally, are these things true? So if the behavior is, well, I just like the taste, like, did you like the taste forever? When you were a kid, did you like your first drink? So like really looking internally, and then externally being like, okay, does alcohol taste good? No, alcohol is ethanol. It does not taste good. The things that taste good are all the sugar and fillers that we put in it to make it palatable. In fact, mice will not drink alcohol. They'll turn their nose out at it, as will every other creature on the planet, because it's a toxin. And our taste buds teach us that we shouldn't eat toxins, right? But we overcome that as humans because we know it will make us feel a certain way by adding all the sugar and stuff. And so if it was Instagram, same idea. Like, why do I do it? Like make your list and then start to get really curious about, like, is that true? Look at it from an internal perspective, and then really look at it from a external perspective, like empirically, like, is this actually true? Like, what does Instagram do? And that's where the research comes in. For alcohol, obviously, I did all that research in the book, so you don't have to do it yourself. And then I ask you all the right questions. But ultimately, if it's not alcohol, you would just go through that process of really looking at, is this true? Like, really true? Like, does it, are video games like really fun? Like, do they really create pleasure in the human experience? And really sort of starting to look at that.
Yeah. So one thing on Facebook, I noticed that my time was creeping up on Facebook. So I just started muting accounts like left and right. And I got to the end of Facebook the other day and I was telling a friend, I'm like, I got to the end of Facebook and she said, oh my gosh, did you find God? I thought that was so funny. It just threw me for such a loop because Facebook knows our minds so well. They've created a product that keeps us addicted to it. So we just don't stop scrolling. And that's why the 15 minutes on Facebook turns into 3 hours. They're brilliant with how our brains work. And what, Social Dilemma? Have you seen that show?
Yeah. I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard lots about it. So worth watching.
You got to watch it. So as you were talking in the Instagram, I was like, wow, Social Dilemma. It totally makes sense. All right, Annie, where can people find you? Where can they get your alcohol experiment, the new book that's coming? Has it been released yet?
Yes. Yeah.
It has. Okay. Tell us all the details.
Okay, awesome. So if you are curious about your relationship with alcohol, there's a free experiment, free challenge at alcoholexperiment.com or in the App Store now, which is super exciting. So just search the Alcohol Experiment in Apple or Google Play. And then my website.
For getting that.
Yeah, it's so exciting. My website is thisnakedmind.com with the this, not a the. I don't think the naked mind leads you anywhere now, but it used to lead you to not good places on the internet. So maybe this.
Thank you for clarifying that. Oh, Annie, you have been so great. Thank you for just blessing us with all that information on how we can just learn to recognize what is happening, have so much grace for ourselves, and move forward into becoming alive, not just awake, but alive and stepping into what we were meant to do. So go follow. Well, you're not on Instagram, right? Are you on Facebook?
Well, yeah, at This Naked Mind. It's
the business,
my team, social media, but
perfect.
I'm not personally there.
Perfect.
But I do create the content.
Yes, you do. And you are such a good writer. You're brilliant the way you articulate it. And then if you don't drink, like Annie was talking about all these other things that we as humans are addicted to. And we're in the sleep stage and we're not even aware of it. So go check her out. Annie Grace. Woo-hoo! Thank you so much.
All right, diving into Annie Grace's top takeaways. Number 1, the brain's number 1 function is for survival. And we do that in 4 ways, which is number 2, that is avoid pain, seek pleasure, conserve energy, and prove yourself right. All right, then we dive into number 3. And when we're talking about the brain and business and starting a business, it throws everything, all those 4 things off. So number 3 would be instead of avoiding pain, we lean into it. Number 4 is instead of seeking pleasure, we delay gratification as we build our business. Number 5, instead of conserving energy, we need all the energy built up to put into growing our business. Number 6, instead of trying to prove ourselves right, we actually find discomfort of knowing that we are wrong over and over again as we grow our business. Then number 7, discomfort is actually the map to help you solve the problem. And then wrapping up with number 8, to be able to learn and change, it takes knowledge, emotion, and then the action. I hope you loved that podcast episode. Annie is one of my absolute dear friends. It is such a joy to be around her and to learn more about the brain and how it works in so many different aspects. All right, have a beautiful, beautiful day, and I will see you next week.